Hey, this is Jim Dewey with Combating the Narrative, and welcome to part 3 of my video on the lies Johnny Harris is telling about the Mexican-American War and the acquisition of the territory in the Southwest. If you've watched this far, you already know what it's about, so let's just jump right in.
And Abe hit the nail on the head. This whole war was started and fought at the pleasure of this president, James K. Polk.
No, the war was fought at the pleasure of and started by the Mexicans who decided to cross the Rio Grande into the United States and ambush and kill American soldiers on American soil. And naturally, the leader of the United States led his country into war because the Mexicans had committed an act of war. And not responding to aggression like that is inviting more naked aggression.
So anyway, the U.S. easily wins the war. They pay Mexico $15 million.
Stop saying it was easy. It wasn't easy, it was martial brilliance. Along with military prowess, it's a proud moment in the United States history. And note, even after that naked aggression, where Mexico invaded American territory and killed American soldiers, even after the United States had completely conquered all of Mexico and could, at a whim, have occupied the whole nation permanently, they still chose to pay Mexico for the territory that they wanted. Paid, not taken. I don't know about your definition of stolen or theft, but it generally doesn't involve paying for what you have taken. In the same way that eminent domain isn't theft either. So stop lying to drive a political narrative. People like you are evil and despicable. And this is not an exaggeration or hyperbole. I genuinely mean that.
And Mexico gave up all of this. As a part of this loss, Mexico also conceded all of this disputed territory, making it officially a part of the U.S. state of Texas. The U.S. had grown significantly in just a couple of years, and Polk got his California. The U.S. could have taken more land. Some American lawmakers at the time wanted to take all of Mexico, and militarily, they likely could have done this.
You're acting like the United States carved out the choicest bits of already populated and civilized Mexico. The territory they acquired was largely not useful or productive land. It was largely unsettled, save the Indians. I mean, it's the Southwest. It's largely desert, very inhospitable. They wanted it largely for commerce so they could complete a railroad. And yeah, if the United States had so desired, all of Mexico would have been added to its own territory. Yet they chose not to. That is a decision that not many other nations in history would have taken.
But they only took this part of Mexico because it was the most sparsely populated, mainly by Native Americans. One senator at the time, who happened to be pro-slavery, argued on the Senate floor against taking all of Mexico, saying, quote, "We have never dreamt of incorporating into the Union any but the Caucasian race, the free white race. Are we to associate with ourselves as equal companions and fellow citizens the Indians and mixed races of Mexico?"
I don't know why you're clutching your pearls and acting shocked. Like, the founders were pretty clear that this was a white country made by white people for white people. That was the whole idea. And the idea of race aside here, why would it be a good idea to incorporate a large number of people into your own republic or democracy who are culturally different from you and have their own system of beliefs and practices and ideologies to which they adhere? Why would you give them political control of your nation? Any political power. They're inevitably going to make decisions that benefit themselves at your expense. You would be giving up power and control in your own nation. This is precisely why the rapid demographic shift in the United States from circa 1965 to today is so alarming, and why this country has changed so radically and so rapidly. But that is a video for another time.
In other words, let me put it plainly, the policy was, let's search for land where we can exterminate the natives and...
No. You don't get to say, in other words, they just wanted to exterminate everybody there. That is such a dangerous and evil lie. That is, again, what I refer to as a blood libel, or a lie that gives justification for one party to do evil things to another. Because here's how the logic with these lies go. Party X either did or is going to do something evil. Therefore, I am justified as Party Y in doing a different evil action because really it's just the lesser of two evils. White Americans in the United States exterminated nobody. There was no policy of extermination or genocide. It didn't happen. Stop saying it did to drive a political narrative. Stop creating racial hatred and racial animosity and racial division in this country.
Settle white people instead of let's take land where there's already big populations that are non-white people that we would have to bring into our country.
I'm confused. Are you implying here that it would have been better for the United States, more moral for the United States to have taken land already occupied and settled instead of land that was largely unoccupied? And yeah, white Americans were looking out for white Americans in the interests of whites. That's what all races and peoples do throughout history. It's not wrong. It's not immoral or evil.
This is a policy that informed American expansion and imperialism for a very long time.
Correct. Your point being?
And it's what guided a lot of what land we took over and what land we didn't take over. Okay, so through this unprovoked, racially tinged war,
It was not unprovoked. Mexicans invaded the United States and killed Americans. Stop lying. Stop. And what's your point by racially tinged? History is racially tinged. Life is racially tinged. It is what it is. It's reality.
Polk checked off California from his list. And just the next month, Oregon was organized into a territory after working out a deal with the British. Polk had exterminated anyone in his way, and now he had a coast-to-coast country.
Stop using the word exterminated. Polk exterminated nobody. The United States exterminated nobody. White people exterminated nobody. Stop lying and stoking racial hatred for political gain. It's disgusting and evil.
A few years later, they bought this little piece of land from Mexico, and this completed the southern border that we know today, one that was for...
Oh, so what you're saying is when Mexico doesn't provoke war, the United States simply buys the territory it wants? Like, what's your point here? Yeah, the United States purchased that territory. Is it wrong to buy things now?
Emerged first from a rebellion of American settlers, then a war at the pleasure of James K. Polk, and then finally that little purchase there at the end. The native people and Mexicans that lived here when the US took it over, and let's be clear on something, that is not a small number. They were predictably oppressed as white settlers fled into this region.
Again, why do you use the word fled? They didn't flee there. They traveled there to live. They settled it. They pioneered the territory. And the Indian Wars were a two-way street. There were crimes committed on both sides, but this was largely Indian aggression as it had been throughout all of history. And what do you mean exactly by oppression? Because in order to counter that narrative, that oppression arc, I need to know precisely what you mean. Because no, they weren't oppressed. They weren't even citizens. They didn't want to be. I mean, we even gave them reservations of their own land so they could continue their own way of life. If it was a policy of extermination, it was a pretty ineffective one.
Often looking for gold. Native people were driven from their land, and the rights of Mexican property owners were erased in the name of a state constitution that only let white people vote.
I mean, initially, citizenship was restricted to free white persons of good character. Voting was also restricted. The Founding Fathers recognized that giving everybody the right to vote was not such a smart idea. There were other requirements too, such as owning property, but I really can't get into detail on precisely why this was a good thing because it gets a little too spicy for YouTube.
After a little more than a century and a half, had become a great nation, the United States of America.
So the U.S. stole Mexico.
I mean, you can't look at all the facts that you yourself have just presented and still honestly believe that the US somehow stole Mexico. You're lying and you know it. Stop lying to your viewers. By your own admission, the United States bought it after they had the opportunity to take it for free. And Mexico started that war that resulted in the transfer of the territory the United States wanted. They invaded America and killed Americans, and they got their just desserts for it.
In the 1800s, partly because they opened their borders to Americans to let them in to work their land.
Yeah, it's almost like throwing open your borders to people who are very, very different from you is like a bad thing. And no, they weren't let in to work the land of Mexicans. They were given chunks of land in exchange for their living there and civilizing the territory. Land that was undeveloped. Territory that was inhospitable. This is not the equivalent of Mexicans coming to the United States today, or South Americans in general, overstaying their visas and being on the government dole and taking from Americans and sending it back to their own economies back home. And in their being here, driving down the wages of the people who are indigenous to this territory and driving up the cost of housing, along with driving up crime and all sorts of other evil things. The United States does not have magical dirt or magical soil. By virtue of their being here, the United States will become more like their third world garbage countries that they ruined. They will not begin to become like Americans and enrich the United States. That's not how it works. And the rapid changes here in the United States and just how bad it has gotten over the last few decades are proof positive of this fact. There was no social safety net for the people who immigrated to the Texas territory. There was only savage wilderness and savage Indians. And out of this, they forged civilization. Don't compare them to people who are coming across the border just to leech off of the success of the United States.
Which is just a very strange full circle irony, especially because today you go to the US-Mexico border and we do everything to make it clear that this side of that wall is the US.
Yes, it is the US. Mass immigration is a form of warfare. We are defending ourselves from yet another invasion. And don't pretend like the borders haven't been thrown open. Just because there's some fencing doesn't mean that we're actually protecting our borders. You know as well as I that people aren't hopping the fence or swimming across the Rio Grande so much as they're just coming here and overstaying their visas. And what specifically have we done to make it clear that they're not welcome here? Because from my perspective, we've done nothing but roll out the red carpet. Borders throughout history have been defended with lethal force time and time again, and the United States border ought to be no different.
And just a few years ago, it was all Mexico.
Not just a few years ago. It's been almost 200 years at this point. And moreover, Mexico had hardly existed at the time that the United States had acquired the territory. That all did not belong to Mexico. It belonged to Spain. The United States has held the territory for almost 10 times the amount of time the Mexicans did. And ultimately, the Mexicans ceded the territory. They got the money for it. They were paid. And when you sell something, you lose property rights to it. You don't get to retain the rights after you've sold it. Stop implying that, oh, it's their territory anyway, so we should just let them all in, because it's not.
I wish, like the Hawaii video, I had some high note to end on here, but I don't. So, see ya.
Well, that's the end of Johnny Boy's collection of lies, and thank God, because it's awful frustrating. And this guy has dozens of videos that are just as bad and are driving that same overarching oppression narrative. And I'm going to tackle a lot of them at some point when I have a little more time. As always, feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, concerns, death threats, whatever you got, I'll take it. If you liked it, share it with your friends and family. This is an important message a lot of people need to see. Because in the realm of immigration politics today, the undertone there that pervades every discussion people seem to have on it is that, well, this is all stolen territory anyway, so how can we say other people don't belong here? And it's simply not true. And it needs to be addressed because the United States, like all nations and peoples, has a right to sovereignty and self-government, and they don't have to allow people in here. In fact, it is our moral obligation not to, and to maintain the sovereignty of the United States, not just for ourselves, but for our posterity.